Greetings, friends around the world. My name is Alexander Sashavedic, and this is Bible News Prophecies program. People thought that 1984 would be impossible. However, have you noticed parallels between 1984 and our day and age? It can happen here indeed, even though much has happened in the United States in the past few years that is, people and media did not even think could ever happen. Because they claimed none of these things could happen in America, called them conspiracies and unreliable and harmful claims. Yet they have all come true in the past year, 2021. On January the 9th, 2022, there was an article exactly speaking about how those things could not happen. And it says that for the past 2 years, independent media has dealt with false claims of pushing conspiracy, having ads disabled on pages because of unreliable and harmful claims when we ordered timely warnings about what we saw coming. In 2020, media martial law came into effect. We were told that it was a bunch of cow manure. No way could medical martial law be implemented in America, a land of the free. Then the lockdowns began, curfews, state governor decrees banning their citizens from visiting neighbors, cancel holiday gatherings with others, and other dictating how many people were allowed to visit the private homes of Americans in their cities. But it could not happen. Here we were told. Yet it did. Then, vaccine passports. Labeled a conspiracy theory when we warned they were coming back in 2020, and now they're here, and the media acts like it is perfectly normal for people to be forced to show their papers in order to dine out, visit sport venues, ads, and concerts. Mandated vaccination, like the issues listed above, when independent media warned that states and or the Biden regime would start mandating vaccines, attempting to take the choice away from Americans as to what they could put in their bodies, we were told, that is right, it is right, no, it can't happen here. COVID camps, aka internet camps. On May 25th, 2021, Stephen Stanford published an article warning about door-to-door vax squads and the coming COVID camps. Stephen highlighted the news reports that in Orange County, Florida, a door-to-door vaccination effort was also underway. Many may remember that Joe Biden also floated the idea publicly about door-to-door vax and testing squads. Today, we see that a proposed bill in Washington state, if passed, would allow officials to forcefully detain and quarantine individuals or groups, including family units. Now if the people detained still have refused to get vaccinated, then a judge can expand that time limit. Certainly sounds like COVID or internment camp proposal to me, but no, it can't happen here in America, right? January 10th, 2022. The Washington State Board of Health has proposed forcibly isolating and quarantining COVID-positive individuals and groups of people or those merely suspected of being infected. The proposed revision to the state's communicable and certain other disease acts suggests including new COVID protocol under the said act. Gateway Pundit reports. The amendments involved procedures for isolation or quarantine and would allow health officers to issue an emergency detention order causing a person or group of persons to be immediately detained for purpose of isolation or quarantine. The revision specifies that an emergency detention order could be issued by a local health officer based solely on his or her discretion. Having anyway personally had factually correct health items removed by Facebook and then YouTube, which removed an item and gave the Continuing Church of God a strike with the threat that it could pull down all video. Yes, however, we have been under a type of medical martial law. Please notice the following parallels in the current United States to elaborate George Orwell's 1984 book. George Orwell's 1984, first published in 1949, is gaining renewed attention as a work still is relevant for America in 2022. Orwell believed that ordinary Americans enjoyed the most freedom of any people on earth. In 1984, Orwell quotes the American Declaration of Independence, which in the world of 1984 would be pure thought crime. Consider other key parallels with the United States today. Centuries of capitalism were held to have procedures of nothing of value, Winston Smith discovers. One could not learn history from architecture any more than one could learn it from books. Streets, inscriptions, memorial stones, the names of streets, anything that might throw light on the past had been systematically altered. In other words, history has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. Joe Biden's handlers, America is nothing more than a bastion of racist oppression founded to preserve and expand slavery. Like the party's take on capitalism, America had never produced anything of value. So, down came the statues, inscriptions, and anything that might throw light on the past. Biden's Department of the Interior has announced replacements for more than 600 names the Board of the Geographic Names deems racist and derogatory. According to Biden's Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, it is all the quest for an inclusive America. In 1984, Big Brother, like Biden, especially watches overall, but goods are in short supply and the people must queue up for everything. As Winston Smith understands, statistics were just as much a fantasy in their original version as in their rectified version. Under English socialism, INCSOC, in Newspeak, things were as good as they could be, and since the party controlled the present, it also controlled the past. In 2022, American socialism, AMSOC, inflation rages and conditions worsen day by day. Like Voltaire's Dr. Pangloss, Biden tells the people they live in the best of all possible worlds, if only they could see it. In 1984, the poet Ampleforth is imprisoned and tortured for letting the word God remain at the end of a line. In 2022, under the Biden junta, traditional religion cannot be allowed to retain influence. Well, related to George Orwell's 1984 and what was going on with civil liberties before COVID-19, we, the Academic Church of God, put the following video, Orwell's 1984 by 2024, in which we indeed explained all of these parallels that I've referred to. In fact, the question is that in 1949, the late George Orwell wrote a disturbing book about a totalitarian government called 1984. Despite laws that are supposed to protect freedom of speech and religion, we're seeing indeed what we are seeing. We are seeing governments taking steps consistent with those that George Orwell warned against. We are also seeing this in the media, academia, and in private companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. With the advent of technology, totalitarianism, beyond what totalitarian state similar is to George Orwell, totalitarianism that, beyond what Orwell wrote is possible. And does the Bible teach the coming of a totalitarian state similar to George Orwell's? What about the Antichrist in 666? Will things get worse? What is the solution? Well, in that same video, Dr. Bob Thiel answered those questions and even more. And the Pocket recommended the following. It says, it can happen here. It says, liberal democracies has enjoyed much better days. In light of recent turns toward authoritarianism in Turkey, Poland, Hungary, and the Philippines, there is widespread talk of a democratic recession. In the United States, President Donald Trump may not be sufficiently committed to constitutional principles of democratic government. In such a time, we might be tempted to try to learn something from earlier turns toward authoritarianism, particularly the triumphant rise of the Nazis in Germany in the 30s. The problem is that Nazism was so horrifying and so barbaric that for many people in nations where authoritarianism is now achieving a foothold, it is hard to see parallels between Hitler's regime and their own governments. Many accounts of the Nazi period depict a barely imaginable series of events, a nation gone mad. That makes us easy to take comfort in the thought that it cannot happen again. But brethren, some depictions of Hitler's rise are more intimate and personal They focused less on well-known leaders, significant events, state propaganda, murders and war, and more on the details of individual lives. They explained how people can not only participate in dreadful things, but also stand by quietly and live fairly ordinary days in the midst of them. They offer lessons for people who now live with genuine horrors, and also for those to whom horrors may never come, but who live in nations where democratic practices and norms are under severe pressure. Well, how disappointing and how saddening. Nevertheless, please consider the following, friends. Milton Mayer's 1955 classic, They Thought They Were Free, recently republished with an afterword by the Cambridge historian Richard Evans, was one of the first accounts of ordinary life under Nazism. In They Thought They Were Free, Mayer decided to focus on 10 people, different in many respects, but with one characteristic in common. They had all been members of the Nazi Party. Eventually they agreed to talk, accepting his explanation that he hoped to enable the people of his nation to have a better understanding of Germany. Well, Mayer's more stunning conclusion is that, with one partial exception, the teacher, none of his subjects saw Nazism as you and I, saw it in any respect. Where most of us understand Nazism as a form of tyranny, Mayer's subjects did not know before 1933 that Nazism was evil. They did not know between 1933 and 1945, that is, that it was evil, and they do not know it is evil now. 7 years after the war, they looked back on the period from 1933 to 1939 as the best time of their lives. How incredible. Best time of their lives. Mayer suggests that even when tyrannical governments do horrific things, outsiders tend to exaggerate their effects on the actual experience of most citizens, who focus on their own lives and the sights which meet them in their daily rounds. Nazism made things better for the people Mayer interviewed, not as many things because it restored some lost national pride, but because it improved daily life. Germans had jobs and better housing. They were able to vacation in Norway or Spain through the Strength Through Joy program. Fewer people were hungry or cold, and the sick were more likely to receive treatment. The blessings of the new order, as it was called, seemed to be enjoyable by everybody. Everybody under quotation mark. Now, many in the 21st century do not fully grasp how desperate and dejected the average German was in the early 1930s. Indeed. Adolf Hitler promised a German utopia and Third Reich, and essentially proclaimed it would last 1,000 years. The German economy improved, people began to have hope. Militarily, Germany regained territories it had lost in World War I. The benefits, so-called benefits of totalitarianism, were shared by most Germans as long as they were not Jews, Gypsies, etc. The political risks of what nations were doing related to COVID-19 have been substantial. Totalitarian actions have been taken by places not considered to be dictatorships, so as their elected leaders have closed businesses, schools, restricted travel, etc. Europe and the other parts of the world are facing massive economic consequences that may lead to a depression. Of course, primarily to an economic depression, but including the real depression in people's lives. Perhaps it should be noted and pointed out that at Wikipedia's article on the Great Depression, there was the photo of Adolf Hitler that is shown now at the beginning of this post. Adolf Hitler was able to rise up because of the Great Depression and the desire for authoritarian leadership to deal with economic crisis and other issues in Germany. The Bible tells of coming millennial, 1,000-year utopia when Joshua, Jesus Christ, returns, Revelation chapter 20, verse 1 through 6. Adolf Hitler promotes and promised to bring in his version Will Europe listen to someone else in the future? Yes. Yes, indeed. That someone else will be the coming European dictator. Indeed, he'll be listened. Thank you for listening to us, dear friends. Until next time, goodbye.